Hello everybody and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff and today we're going to be going over something a little bit different, something that we haven't done in the past. We're going to just be talking about one specific player, and that's Kyle Rudolph. Now, why I've decided to do this, in my opinion, I think Kyle Rudolph for the 2018 fantasy football season is the most underrated tight end in the class. Now you may be thinking, well Andrew, usually he's ranked in the top 10. His ADP is around 8. And that's a pretty good spot for him. Well, I'm going to try to give an argument for the next 25 to 30 minutes to try to convince you that not only is Kyle Rudolph going to be a top 5 tight end next season, he's going to be unstoppable. Because not only is Kirk Cousins the quarterback, and not only is the offensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings changed, but it's in his favor. It's going to all help Kyle Rudolph become a top 5, maybe even top 3 tight end in 2018. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Hey everybody, how's it going? So to begin, it's pretty simple. We're going to go over the last couple seasons of Kyle Rudolph's stats. Just basic stuff, right? So last season in 2017 with Case Keenum, Kyle Rudolph produced an average kind of year, right? He had 532 receiving yards. He had 57 receptions on 81 targets, and he had 8 touchdown receptions, which is pretty good, right? All things considered, in half-point PPR scoring leagues, he was the 7th-ranked tight end. Now, you may be thinking, well, that's decent. Well, at this moment in time, the way I see it, Kyle Rudolph could have been way better last year. Case Keenum obviously didn't utilize him as much, and there was a couple injuries that, plagued Kyle Rudolph to the point where there were nagging injuries throughout the entire season. Now, he didn't miss a single game last year, but there was something in his ankle that was a little, rough on him, and he had surgery this past offseason. So just to put that into perspective, he was a 7th-ranked tight end with a quarterback that generally doesn't like to throw tight ends, and he had an injury. Okay. Now in 2016, with Sam Bradford under center, Kyle Rudolph was an animal, right? He was a 2nd-ranked tight end in half-point PPR scoring leagues. And he had 132 targets, 83 receptions, 7 touchdowns, and he was, the number 2 ranked tight end in fantasy. In 2016, he had the most targets of all tight ends, and he performed with that, right? So having a quarterback that was willing to throw him the ball, consistently deliver it game in and game out, gave Kyle Rudolph an opportunity. He acted upon that opportunity and produced for fantasy owners at the end of the day. Now, a lot of people may be thinking, well, Kyle Rudolph is just an average tight end. They shouldn't have signed him to that $36 million contract they did in 2014. He hasn't proved himself, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, in my opinion, Kyle Rudolph, extremely underrated, a great pass-catching tight end. And with this Minnesota's offense and Kirk Cousins, he can honestly be unstoppable. So we're going to, obviously we're talking about Kyle Rudolph, but it's kind of hard to talk about what I expect out of Kyle Rudolph in this coming season without talking about his quarterback, Kirk Cousins. So let's get into a little bit of Kirk Cousins' history, right? So we're going to talk, this is the best picture I found of him in a photoshopped Vikings uniform. So I think it's pretty good. Anyway, so we're going to talk about his history at Washington and how he used his tight ends with the Washington Redskins, right? So, obviously, Kirk Cousins loves his tight ends. He uses them on a weekly basis, and he just, on a consistent yearly basis, 25%, it was about 24.5% of his passes were towards tight ends, right? So let's go to 2015 specifically, right? It was his first year that he started all 16 games of the season. Obviously the year prior, Robert Griffin got injured and he was done, right? So in 2015, Kirk Cousins threw for 4,100 yards, 29 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. And, he had a really good fantasy season of 353 and 6-point per passing touchdown leagues, right? So Kirk Cousins, all things considered, 2015 was great. Now, the stat that I really want you to pay attention to is the production of his tight ends in that season, right? So with the Washington Redskins, Kirk Cousins used Jordan Reed primarily, right? In 2015, Jordan Reed had 114 targets, 87 receptions, 952 receiving yards, and 11 receiving touchdowns, right? In this season, in the 2015 season, Jordan Reed had 204.7 fantasy points and half-point PPR scoring. Now, that was only with Jordan Reed playing 14 games. So imagine if Jordan Reed had played the entire season, right? In the games that Jordan Reed did not play, the two, Derek Carrier had 22 targets, 17 receptions, and 141 yards. So even a tight end that a lot of us, right? Derek Carrier, does that ring any bells? Not really, right? A tight end that people don't really talk about or even know about. He had some pretty good stats with Kirk Cousins under center. So in 2015, all things considered, the tight ends were pretty good for the Washington Redskins. Why? Because of Kirk Cousins, right? So let's move on to his 2016 season, right? So Kirk Cousins in 2016 made leaps and bounds, right? He had 4,900 passing yards, right? That's 800 more than the year prior. 25 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 4 rushing touchdowns. Again, 346 fantasy points and 6-point per passing touchdown leagues. Another great performance by Kirk Cousins, right? But what did he do with his tight ends? Now, obviously, Jordan Reed was still with the team, but he wasn't healthy the entire season in 2016. He only played 12 games in which he had 89 targets, 66 receptions, and was able to produce 686 receiving yards with 6 receiving touchdowns, right? All things considered, that's a pretty good year, having only played 12 games, right? But now, the backup, which they had brought in, was Vernon Davis, right? They no longer had Derek Carey. They brought in Vernon Davis, and Vernon Davis produced really well that 2016 season. He had, personally, 59 targets, 44 receptions, 583 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Now, they also had 2 other tight ends on the roster, which had 4 receptions and 37 yards. I'll add that to the statistic as we continue. But at the end of the day, that's another year where Kirk Cousins and his tight ends were extremely successful, and they produced fantasy-wise, right? Yes, Jordan Reed hasn't been healthy ever, but when he plays, he plays, and Kirk Cousins delivered him the ball. Now, this last season, with the Washington Redskins, the team was falling apart. Jordan Reed barely played. The offensive line was a carousel of guys getting switched in and switched out. The backfield with Chris Thompson was injured. They had gotten rid of Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson out wide. The Washington Redskins offense was not as good last year. Now, Kirk Cousins still produced 4,000 passing yards, 27 touchdowns, 4 rushing touchdowns, and 331 fantasy points and 6-point per passing touchdown leagues. Now, I'm not. This is an ad sort of towards Kirk Cousins, right? Kirk Cousins is a monster. He's consistent on a yearly basis. Yes, last year, his production dipped by 20 fantasy points, but that was all thing considered. His team was not very good. The Washington Redskins were not very good last year. Now, what did he do for his tight ends in 2017? Jordan Reed, again, had only played 6 games in 2017. Again, Jordan Reed's never healthy. But with the opportunities that Jordan Reed was given, he had 35 targets, 27 receptions, 211 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns, right? In his absence, Vernon Davis had pretty much bolstered all the targets and receptions with 69 targets, 43 receptions, 648 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns, right? And then obviously there were other tight ends within the roster. I think Niles Paul's been there for the last couple seasons with 15 receptions on 107 yards. So now if you take all of that, okay, all of the production that Kirk Cousins has had. Now, I know this is a Kyle Rudolph video, but I'm getting to the point, okay? Kirk Cousins and tight ends have produced, on average, for the last 3 seasons, per season, okay, 138 targets to tight ends, 101 receptions, 1,122 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns per year, okay? If I need to read it, I'll read it again, okay? 138 targets, 101 receptions, 1,122 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns per year on average. The tight ends of the Washington Redskins. Okay, 24.5% of the passes that Kirk Cousins threw, his attempts were towards tight ends. Okay, now to put this in perspective, we talked about earlier. Kyle Rudolph in 2016, when he had the most targets in the NFL, when he had 100 plus targets, he was the number 2 ranked tight end. Now, if Kirk Cousins comes in and throws the ball 130, there's 138 targets towards tight end. If he comes in and targets Kyle Rudolph 100 times, okay, Kyle Rudolph is going to be a top 5 tight end. Okay, because Kyle Rudolph is an absolute monster. I'm telling you, people underrate this guy. Why? I don't know. He's got great size, great speed. He's good, down the middle of the field. He's not afraid because he's a bigger guy. He's going to, take contact. And he's deceptively quick. So, to my next point, okay? The offensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, you may be thinking, why does this matter? If he has Kirk Cousins, this should be fine. Well, the offensive coordinator of the Vikings changed. Pat Shurmur is now the coach of the, if I'm not mistaken, honestly, I don't remember, but he did move, right? They brought in John DeFilippo, right? So John DeFilippo was the quarterback's coach for the Philadelphia Eagles these past 2 seasons. So with the Philadelphia Eagles, DeFilippo has been working with Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. He's obviously turned Carson Wentz from, a pretty good rookie to an MVP candidate in his second year. And he was able to take Nick Foles, right? A guy that got cut by the Kansas City Chiefs, a guy that got cut by the LA Rams, and a guy that finally made his way back to the Eagles. He took that guy and he tore up the playoffs and he beat Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, right? Obviously, there's other factors. There's a defense, there's special team, whatever. But at the end of the day, he was able to take Nick Foles, a mediocre quarterback at best, right? He had 1 or 2 good starting seasons as the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. Prior to that, or after that, he was quite just mediocre. He was a backup on a yearly basis. He took that guy and made him a great quarterback, right? Now, what can he do with Kirk Cousins? Obviously, Kirk Cousins still young, and he's got a lot to learn. He's a great quarterback, but he's going to make him better. Now, the point that I'm trying to make with DeFilippo, right? So prior to being the quarterback's coach for the Eagles, John DeFilippo was the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns in 2015. And then prior to that, he was a quarterback's coach for the Oakland Raiders. But that's irrelevant. I just wanted to throw that out there. So when he was the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns, are you ready for this? In 2015, Gary Barnidge, right? Oh my God, that sounds familiar. I played, where's Gary Barnidge, right? In 2015, Gary Barnidge was the number 2 ranked tight end in fantasy, right behind Rob Gronkowski, okay? A Browns player was the number 2 ranked in anything. Imagine that, okay? Just my brain's exploding, right? So Gary Barnidge, in the year that John DeFilippo was the offensive coordinator for the team, okay? Gary Barnidge produced 125 targets, 79 receptions, 1,043 receiving yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns, having 197.8 half-point PPR fantasy points. Okay, he was the leading receiver of the team. Now, you may be thinking, well, Andrew, there was the Browns. But if the offense dictates to throw the ball, right, and it's a lot of the plays are set up for a tight end to make receptions left and right, well, then John DeFilippo might be coming to the perfect place. He's coming to a place where they've got a consistent, defense. They've got Kirk Cousins, the gunslinger, and they've got Kyle Rudolph, who is extremely underrated. That's what this whole video is about, right? At the end of the day, this offensive coordinator is going to set up Kyle Rudolph for success. There's nothing else besides that I can see coming from this, right? If Kyle Rudolph comes out and, doesn't catch a single ball, I will literally put out a video of me breaking my camera. Okay? All right? I'm not gonna like say if he's not a top 5 tight end, because at the end of the day, maybe he tears his ace. Yeah, bada boom, hey, something like that, right? Okay, but anyway, in my opinion, Kyle Rudolph's going to be extremely good this year, right? I honestly think he's going to be a top 5 tight end, right? One of those, it's not that the other tight ends aren't going to be great, but it's that Kyle Rudolph's just going to be better, plain and simple. Now, other than the offensive coordinator on the screen, as you can see, Kyle Rudolph's health, right? What about his health? You mentioned it before, Andrew. Well, obviously last year he had a nagging ankle injury. He's had a couple surgeries in the past couple years. Now, players that get hurt often stay hurt. Kyle Rudolph's not that way. He's played 16 games the last 2 seasons. And, coming back from this injury, he's already back. He's already participating in drills. He's already participating in 11-on-11s in the mandatory workouts for this offseason. So Kyle Rudolph's ready. This surgery was taken care of, and all things considered, Kyle Rudolph is healthy. He's got a great quarterback. He's got a good offensive coordinator for the scheme that fantasy players kind of want out of this kind of a tight end. And I see Kyle Rudolph just having a lot of success this coming season. Anyway, how long have we been talking for? 16 minutes? That's all I've pretty much got. At the end of the day, I want to thank everybody for watching. Appreciate all the support so far. If you haven't seen any of my other videos, please check them out. Like, share, subscribe for more content. And that's pretty much it. So, as I usually talk about, right? In my prior videos, I always say you want to probably have a top 5 tight end on your roster. What is the benefits of having a top 5 tight end? You don't have to scramble every week to think, oh man, is Austin Hooper going to score a touchdown? Is Mercedes Lewis going to figure it out this week? Is Tyler Eifert healthy? You don't want that kind of guy on your roster, right? You want a top 5 tight end. Now, when I say have a top 5 tight end, I don't mean have a 2017 top 5 tight end, right? Because some guys last year that were top 5 tight ends, they could drop off. You never know. There's always a possibility that Jimmy Graham went to the Packers and he ends up being garbage. So when I say have a top 5 tight end, I mean have a 2018 top 5 tight end. So when people aren't drafting Kyle Rudolph, and you've seen this video and you're like, well, with Kirk Cousins, John DeFilippo as the offensive coordinator, and Kyle Rudolph being healthy and ready to get after it, I'm going to wait on tight end. I'm going to pick up Kyle Rudolph, and I'm going to win my league because this guy's putting up 10 points a week on average. Anyway, I see him putting up like 200 fantasy points this year. I'm crazy, but the stats I gave speak for themselves. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. This was one of my shorter videos. Hopefully you like it. Please comment below any suggestions on what we should talk about next. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep pumping out content. And appreciate everybody, and have a nice weekend. See you guys.